We're at that speed down to 2,500.
Good point. Wherever you reduce speed to 180.
BlackBox.
Speaking of my ear now, saying that we're actually recording, which means we're live now. We're on. Well, we're not live really, but everything from here forward, they're not going to edit. So, Joy, watch your cursing.
Okay, I'll try.
So, so on that note, I want to thank everyone for joining us again today on KP's Black Box. And I have the honor and the privilege of interviewing a couple that this has been on my mind, Bob and Joy, for 4 years, if not that, sitting in your living room in Kentucky. And you shared a story with me of a unfortunate tragedy that happened in your life and some shipmates of yours in the Navy. And it had such an impact on me that I was like, one day, I don't know if you remember me saying this to you, but we need to record this. We need to have a conversation about it, share it with your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. And so, man, I got you. Chris was actually really surprised that I was able to get you in an interview.
Really?
So I think he's going to be really excited to see this and be able to share it with his kids and grandkids. So I have the honor and the privilege today of having an American hero.
No.
Yes. Yeah, I know. You're not going to let me say it, but I'm going to say it. It's recorded. We can't take it back, Bob. But I'm going to always start out each podcast with toasting our nation's finest, our nation's military. And, I'm a part of your club. I'm a prior Marine and, part of the club of you Navy guys, the Marines Department of the Navy, the men's department.
We have a great story. A great story to tell you about the Marines and the Navy.
Oh, boy. This could turn on me. But I'd like to raise a glass to you today and to your fellow shipmates and the men and women who were on that carrier that day in 1967. And yours is water.
Thanks.
Mine is a little Johnny Walker here. But thank you for your service. Thank you, Joy, for holding down the fort at home. God bless you guys. God bless our military.
Amen.
That's some really good water. Woo. That one got me. You probably prayed and had the Lord say, he's going to drink that Johnny Walker, make him choke. That doesn't usually happen to me.
Oh, really?
So I'm already choked up. Great. Bob, I'd like to start with you today. Lieutenant Commander Sandlin, you retired of how many years in the Navy?
It was just shy of 21.
21 years.
20.
So, Joy, thank you also for 21 years of service.
It was my pleasure.
Yeah. So take me back, if you would, before we start talking about July 29th, 1967. Vietnam era fighter pilot. How did you get there? Where did the naval career start for you? What was the driving factor to have you join one of our nation's greatest branches?
I'd always looked forward to maybe flying someday. I would walk out in the front yard, and you probably hear many kids say they walk out in the front yard, look up and see an airplane flying over. And I would wonder how did he land that thing? I just picked out the landing as one aspect of it, flight. But I said I sure would like to be able to do that someday. And that was it. And then the next time, I saw an airplane, same thoughts would run through my mind. And it was when I was at Murray, I had walked into the student union building, and that was where the military recruiters normally parked their stuff, put their table out, and so forth. And this specific day, there was a couple of Navy representatives there in their whites. And they had their pictures of airplanes and different positions in flight. And I just walked over and started looking at the pictures. And one of the representatives said, "You like to fly?" I said, "Well, I've never flown. I've always thought about it. It'd be fun to learn how to fly." And he says, well, listen, we've got a little test here, and there's only about 8 questions on it. And
It's my kind of test.
why
8
don't
questions.
we just, why don't we just, if you want to, you know, you're not obligated for anything, but if you'd like to take the test just to see if you're aeronautically adaptable. Big words. And so sure. He says, let me just ensure that you understand it. You're not committing to anything by taking this test. This is just to see, would you be adaptable to the flying environment? And so I said, well, okay. And so I took the test, and it didn't take long. And he says, no, you're good. You're good to go. He says, if you'd like to find out more, you know, we can arrange for you, first of all, to see if you're physically qualified. And so we can set you up, get you down to Memphis, Naval Air Station there at Memphis, and get you to see if you qualify physically. And I said, well, okay. And he says, again, you're not obligated for anything. This doesn't commit you to anything. It just says we look at you and physically you're qualified. And I said, okay. So they flew me. They sent a plane up and flew me down there. And I thought, wow, this is a neat deal. And took the physical, and I had 20/15 vision, and I was not colorblind, which is critical. But the doctor, who's the weekend warrior doctor, he says, Bob, I'm sorry to tell you this, but you have a slight astigmatism, and there is a 0 permission, if you have any astigmatism at all, to qualify for the pilot program. And he says, however, the Navy has a new airplane. It's really a hot jet fighter, 2-seater.
Okay.
And you could fly in the second seat as an NFO, a naval flight officer. And he says, that's as close as I can get you to the stick. And I said, well, okay, I'll look at that. And he says, we'll set something up and see how it works out. And he was just very laid back with me. And so they ended up flying me again down to Memphis for the interview and to see if I would be accepted. And so I went through that process, and they brought me back to Murray. And
Murray University, Murray State,
Murray State,
where you went to school. Okay. What'd you study? Underwater basket weaving.
What you mean? What books was that supposed to be?
Yeah. Well, I see.
Studying
what you
is a different term.
Yeah,
I started out majoring in math and physics, but that turned out to be over my head, and so I switched to math and biology, and I enjoyed that, dissecting frogs and different.
Yeah. All right, you're letting us into the creepy side of Bob here, so be careful now.
Well, it was interesting, but I ended up getting a major in biology and math, and then getting a minor in chemistry.
Oh, really?
So
Nothing to do with flying.
Nothing to do at all, but
yeah. And that was pretty much it.
So when did you enjoy meat?
Oh gosh!
Put you on the. It's live now. We're recording. We can't edit.
Yeah, I was a junior, and she was, I guess, a sophomore.
At Murray.
At Murray, and I had pledged a fraternity, ATO, Alpha Tau Omega, and they had a mixer, and you had to bring a young lady over to meet the senior members of your fraternity, and
The pledges did that, not the actors.
Yeah, that's when we were pledging, and. I pledged you had to have a set of grades before you could go into the program. Yeah. Go through what they wanted to call the program. But anyway, I think that may have been the first time that I met Joy, and then after that
So they would the the seniors would have you bring the young ladies,
Yes.
hoping that maybe they would find a new young lady to meet.
You said that, not me.
Actually,
Yeah.
actually, it was, I think the pledges in his fraternity would go and get fine pledges in the sororities and bring them over to mix with their. And actually, I remember that specifically, and I remember there was some dancing, and he came over and asked me to dance, and I remember,
Could he dance, Joy?
Yeah, he could.
He can.
He
Yeah,
could.
okay.
It was impressive.
Could and can, right? Both. Yeah.
But we didn't start dating until middle of my sophomore year and his junior year. He had quit playing football, and he had after quit playing football, I don't know, he didn't tell you that, but he was also a football player on the scholarship there. And after he decided 3 years was enough, he was going to quit, he started eating in the same dormitory or same cafeteria that I ate in. And he would sometimes come over and sit down at our table, and so it just kind of led one thing to another. And
it was hard to say no to those still blue eyes, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
I had been noticing him on campus, and he was dating other people, and I was dating other people, and then he finally asked me out. And he asked me. It was really interesting because when he did finally ask me out, he invited me to go to church with him because he had heard I was a Christian, and so we went to church first, and then we went to a movie. Our first 3 dates was going to church and then going to a movie.
And then we fast forward, and you guys.
Well, there's one more
f-
important piece
Okay.
of information here
All
that
right.
I want to share with you.
Please.
And that was the phone call
Okay.
from the senior chief at the station in Memphis, the recruiting station in Memphis. And he called he says, Bob, congratulations. He says, you have been selected. And says, I would like to just check with you and see when we can work out a date that you can come down and be sworn in. Well, the words sworn in stuck.
Yeah.
And as soon as he said that, I said, well, I need to give this some thought. And I just don't want to rush anything like this. And he says, yeah, I understand what you're saying. He says, but you've met all the criteria. And we can set you up for whatever class you want to go into.
And this is around like 1965, I'm guessing?
Well, it actually was the fall or winter of '64
Okay.
when these phone calls took place.
All right.
And so finally, he tried to talk me into going ahead and making the move, and I was a little stubborn, and I said, no, I really do want to think about this because I'm not really sure I'm ready to commit. And it was the term I would commit.
Yeah.
And so finally, we ended our conversation. And he said, okay, he says, give some thought. And I think it was a couple of days later, I had a call from the skipper and the commanding officer and we talked for a while, and pretty soon he had done this, obviously, many times. And so I was convinced. And I says, okay. And he says, we'll set up a date, and we'll bring you down and get you sworn in and set you up for a class. And so we did. Went down and was sworn in, and I said, now, I'll graduate in June next year. And I have a job working at the railroad during the summers. And I just wondered if there's some bills that I want to pay, and I wondered if I could sort of slide that class date past the summer. And he says, well, yeah, we can do that. He says, we can go up through September, I think. And so September '65, it was the middle of the month, and that's what they set me up with. And they flew me out of, I got a flight, I don't remember now how I got jumped, but anyway, they flew me down to Pensacola.
And that's where you did your flight training.
And that's where I did the no flight training there. This was all a couple of weeks of boot camp treatment.
Right.
And then you went into the classroom, and then every day you went to class. And it was 16 weeks.
Wow.
And then once you finished that, so we actually finished in January, and we got our commissions.
And you and Joy were still dating at this time?
Yeah, she was still back.
Well, we had been pinned. He had given me his fraternity pin a few months after we started dating, and I had given it back to him at one point, and then I got it back. And then just before we graduated, I realized when he finished early, a few months earlier than me. Maybe.
Smarty pants. Yeah.
Well, because he was a year ahead of me.
Okay.
But he had played football, so they scheduled him to play
Yeah.
longer. But anyway, I could see our relationship was kind of, we had been going steady for 2.5 years and been pinned. And he started, you know, he was torn, I think, between, you know, he's going to go off and join the military. Do I take a girlfriend with me? You know, what? I don't know.
It's
But
called commitment.
Come in.
anyway, I could tell that things weren't the same. And my father, who was a great father, and he said, Joy, you need to let him go. If he loves you, he'll come back.
Yeah.
But if he doesn't love you, you need to let him go.
Yeah.
And so I gave him back his pen, and so we were still, you know, I
And
loved
back
him.
then, the pen, that was a big deal.
It
I mean,
was.
you're committing. It's almost like an engagement, right?
Right. And I knew I loved him. And
Yeah.
we dated a lot of other people. But so I started dating again, and he was dating while he was down in Pensacola. But anyway, so yes, we were kind of
Back and forth.
kind of
on and
together,
off,
not
yeah.
together, you know.
Yeah.
We were writing letters to each other and calling, and
You knew, didn't you, Bob? You were playing your cards, and
Well, I was a little nervous.
yeah,
You know, it's you know, because I realized it was a commitment.
yeah.
It's a big commitment, and
So help me understand, if you would. Now you're going through this relationship thing. You're training in the Navy. Your vision is to be a pilot. I mean, that's really what you wanted, was to fly an airplane, and they give you the secondary option to get as close as you can to the stick,
Right.
as you said it.
right.
To be a Rio, I guess is what they would call
They
them
call
today.
it in the fighter in the F4s. They call you Rio,
Rio.
radar intercept operator.
Okay.
And but I realized that because of my eyes, because of the astigmatism, that I couldn't get there.
Yeah.
And so I was excited just to fly in the Phantom.
So I want to come back, because I think there's an important segue of something that happened in both of your lives. Joy, you have a little experience with flying yourself.
very little. But
Very
dangerous.
little, but very exciting.
Yes. Absolutely.
So before we get too deep into Bob's naval career, I think if I'm piecing this story together, right, you had an incident in an airplane.
Right.
Share with us what happened to you, and this is while you were dating?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So,
I hadn't.
It was
hadn't given-
actually it was after we graduated,
Yeah.
okay.
and I was in Bill Grove, Illinois, for the summer, working on the railroad.
Working on the railroad, and
And
you had a family member who was a pilot.
Right, and he worked for Redstone Arsenal in Alabama, and he had a layover in Nashville, Tennessee, which was about an hour from my home. So he flew his own private plane to our home to visit with us as family, and we all met at my grandmother's house.
He'd landed in the field, I think you.
He had
you told
actually
me.
landed in a field by my grandmother's house, and it had alfalfa in it, I think. It was some type of a crop that was. And he said, "Who wants to go flying with me?" And I had been flying with him 2 weeks prior when my roommate from college had gotten married in Alabama, and I stayed with him and his wife. And I was frightened then. He was always a I don't want to call him a daredevil, but he would go where other people would be afraid to go.
Yeah.
I was a little nervous, but he said, "Joy's not afraid to fly with me." And so I didn't want to say, "Yes, I am." But anyway, so my younger sister, Edwina, who's 7.5 years younger than me, and my cousin, who was visiting my grandmother at the time, and her son, and my sister and I all went flying with him, went to go flying. So we took off, and the plane he was going faster and faster and faster, but not getting airborne because of the pull on the wheels from the alfalfa.
From the crop on the ground.
crop.
Yeah.
And there was a fence row at the end of this field that had trees in it. And just as we knew we were going to, hit those trees if we didn't get up, he pulled back on the throttle, and we went straight up, and he hit a branch off of a tree, which spun
gosh.
us around, and we crashed. We landed in a ditch. The wings were on the side of the road and the side of the field. It knocked the windows and the doors off of the plane. The tail was flopped over.
Oh
And
my gosh.
my cousin and of course, family began to run.
Yeah.
And I remember my mother driving up. She had gone by my cousin's father's, who was my dad's identical twin brother, and picked him up, and they were driving down. Just didn't quit. They didn't stop at grandmother's house. They just kept driving, and I crawled out first because I was sitting next to him. I was holding his clipboard, and I said, "Mother, take me to the hospital." She said, "Well, let's see how everybody else is first." And
What happened to you?
well, I just had cuts. I had stitches in my lip, stitches in my knee, stitches in my finger, and black eyes, but I had no broken bones.
Wow.
I had blood all down my front from bleeding from cuts, and mud down the back where the mud in the ditch had come down my back. But my cousin had mud in his mouth, and he was in he was seriously injured, and he was in a body cast for 4 months.
Oh my gosh.
But no one else
passed.
Nobody else was hurt.
Because of mud in that ditch. If the airplane had landed a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right, it would have probably killed all 4 of them.
Yeah.
But because of the wings were landing on the road and the bank, and the nose went into the ditch
And it
where
had
the
been
mud
raining.
was,
Yeah.
all that impact was reduced. And
Wow.
the 2 in the back seat were hanging in their straps. They weren't hurt at all.
Wow.
But it
So
was
when that moment happened and you hit that tree, was everyone in the plane like,
Nobody.
what went on inside the plane? Was it noisy? Was it
No,
crazy?
it
Was
happened so quiet. None of us said a word except my cousin, and he said, "Oh my God, we're crashing,"
Wow.
and that was all that was said.
what he
And
put-
then it happened.
Yeah, it happened so
fast.
quick.
Yeah, he pulled back on the yoke, not the throttle. He had full throttle on, but he pulled
Right.
back on. But he was so engrossed in the speed that he let his direction be a little bit too close to the tree.
Yeah.
And so as he pulled the nose up, the airplane started to climb. The left wing, caught the limbs, and just rotated the airplane around to nose down. But
And all that inertia and power just.
yeah, and they went
Nice.
right straight down, but the point that they went down into was the only point that could save them, and that was
The
between
provision
the
of God
road
right
and-
there of your life.
It was a
Yeah.
God thing.
Yeah.
But I remember when I got home that night, calling Bob, and he was working in the railroad, and I said, "I don't want you to fly. I don't want you to fly." I was so frightened after being in a plane crash. He said, "You shouldn't have gotten in that plane."
With your crazy uncle?
Cousin, it was my
Oh,
cousin.
your cousin. Your cousin.
My cousin Herman.
Oh, wow. Did Herman ever fly again?
Oh yeah. He had his own plane, and he actually was living in Hopkinsville when he died. He used to fly his own plane over, and land on a road and taxi down the highway to my dad's house and cut his hair, and then Daddy would cut his hair, and my daddy was a barber, and then he would fly home, or he'd fly over his parents' home, who was right next door to Mother and Daddy, and drop a corsage or some gift off for Mother's Day.
So
He was a daredevil.
Okay. Did you ever fly with him again?
Never.
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 Fool me once, right?
Actually, I take that back. I lied. I didn't mean to. My grandmother died when Bob was in Key West, Florida on a Navy thing, and I was pregnant with our 3rd child, Amy. And so I flew home for my grandmother's funeral, and my dad's twin brother and Herman, my cousin, who lived in Florida, flew his plane, to the funeral. So Bob was in Key West. We were there, and so they said, "Why don't you fly back with us to Florida?" And Bob picked us up on the way from Key West, and he was in a Volkswagen. So we had 2 kids and a pregnant woman and a Volkswagen. But anyway, so on the way flying down there, they tried to scare me, and my uncle, my cousin, asked him if he wanted to fly the plane. My uncle, who was not a pilot, and I was terrified. It was the first time I'd been in a plane other than a commercial plane.
Since your plane crashed with
Since our
your
plane
cousin.
crashed and with him, and I was terrified, and I didn't want Kevin and Chris to be frightened. I didn't want to scare them, and it was all I could do to
Keep your wits.
keep my
and-
wits. But yes,
Keep your
I did.
bearing.
I'd
Wow.
forgotten about that, but I never flew with him again.
Oh my gosh, that is wild. So while that's going on, you're down in, did you say Key West, or was that still in Pensacola
That's when my grandmother died.
when your grandmother died?
Yeah.
All right, so where were you when she had her plane crash? Where were you?
You were in Illinois,
Illinois.
working on the railroad.
It
And
was
it's the
a little
railroad
place
time.
called
Okay.
Villa Grove, Illinois. It's about 30 miles, 40 miles south of, there's a university there in Illinois.
Okay, not Marymount.
No,
Or-
no, it's the big one. But
What is it? Champagne?
yeah, Champaign,
Okay.
Urbana, I think
Yeah.
was what. But anyway, that's where we were.
Yeah.
It's just a little town, and I had a fraternity brother who lived there, so he and I both would work the what they call the extra board.
Yeah.
And it's just a block on the wall of listing of people that are available to fill in for the senior folks who took vacations and stuff like that. And so during the summer, that list of workers would rotate on different runs. And I almost every day I would get a hop on one of the trains.
Yeah.
Most of them went down to East St. Louis from Villa Grove. They came out of Champaign, Urbana, came on, I think even Chicago. The IC, Illinois Central, they had a track right beside the CNEI, which is the one I was working on, and they went north-south. We went south and then did a half turn over toward East St. Louis.
Okay.
And that's where the yards were. And we'd go in there and unhook the train, go hit the bunkhouse because it'd be midnight.
Yeah.
And sleep till about 8 or so in the morning, and then hook up another train and then head north again. And
So while she's being a daredevil in an airplane, you're getting some experience on the railroad. But in preparation for you to go to flight school,
yeah, I had to
and
go in
get your training.
September.
Yeah.
September '65. I had to go. That was the class I was in.
And she's telling you, Bob, man, this flying stuff is for the birds only, not human beings.
Yeah,
And you want to go fly.
Yeah.
And she's had a traumatic event.
Yeah.
So did that play with your psyche a little bit? That
We discussed it,
Yeah.
but I think she knew that I really did want to fly. I mean, I really wanted to fly, and it was sort of a subject that we weren't going to make any changes with.
So let me take it back to use a pilot term here. Let me take it to a 40,000-foot view now. So we're in a pretty tumultuous period then. I was born in '69, right? So I don't have an aspect to be able to know this period other than what I've read and studied in history, and you know my parents who grew up in the 1960s as well, 1950s. But you know we're at a pretty crazy time in our country. Vietnam is really now starting to heat up. And you're a young college student, graduated, volunteered to serve. And I always like to point this out in our country. You know, no one said you had to go. You said I wanted to go. And I still salute the young men and women in our country today. It's 100% volunteer force still. Now, there was selective service back then, and, you know, guys were being told to sign up. But you elected without someone saying, pick a branch, Bob, and, you know, you wanted to go.
Well, you had those little cards that came in the mail and says you were one Echo or whatever they were, and then you were for something when you were in college. If you went into teaching, you would get a waiver, but I didn't go into teaching. I decided to go right into the military because I wanted to fly.
Yeah,
and that was my desire.
Wow. So you get this opportunity. You've put in your mind, I want to fly. You set a goal, and you set a goal to fly, and then somebody throws you a curveball and says, well, Bob, you can't fly, but you can be a Rio, you can be an officer sitting next to the pilot. How much of a blow was that to you, and how did you mentally go, you know what, I've asked you to let me fly. I want to fly. How did you get from there to getting over into the managing the stick?
Well, I just basically said it. I decided that was a commitment, and that if I wanted to fly, that was the only way I was going to be able to do it. I had no idea what would allow me to go back into the pilot program. But so flying the second seat in the Phantom was, I loved it. I loved it. I wished I was in the front seat, but I couldn't be because of the physical. So after I graduated and got my commission, which was in January of '66, and
Okay.
then we started training for an NFO. So we had some training in Oceana, and then you had
Here in Virginia Beach.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
and then some training in Glencoe, Georgia.
That's
And
where
that-
we spent our honeymoon.
That's where we are, and St. Simon's Island, little known island right
Okay,
there. And that's where we had our little apartment. It's a row of apartments, almost like a motel area,
Okay.
the early stage motels. First one was ours. I think we had one bedroom, and then one bedroom that the owners of the motel facility used for storage. It could have been another bedroom,
Hmm.
but that was the way it's set up. And then I went through training there, then back to Oceana for some training. And I think that was when I went through what CAREQUAL. You had the CAREQUAL 2. You didn't CAREQUAL.
And CAREQUAL's carrier qualification?
Yes.
Okay.
The ROs went with a experienced pilot.
Okay.
The instructors went with the new pilots. And when they went through and when they go through pilot training, they go through a period of CAREQUALs, which are day traps. But they haven't gotten to the point where they start doing night landings on a carrier, which is that's the biggie. That's where you really have to work. And so I went through all of that, went through and CAREQUAL'd with a senior. Most time it was a senior pilot that was coming back for a refresher before going to another squadron or even taking over command of a squadron. And got all that done. And then when I finished all of that, finished my training at Key West, we did a lot of intercept training down there. And then back to Oceana. Then I was assigned to a fleet squadron.
Okay.
My first squadron, which is actually the squadron that I went with on board Forrestal, was a VF-11 Red Rippers. Great squadron, great CO. And
Are the Red Rippers still around today?
I think they are.
Okay.
I think they are. I've sort of lost track of them.
Yeah.
But
You deserve not to have to keep
74.
up with those guys.
yeah, VF-74 and VF-11 were
Okay. Yeah.
were the two fighter squadrons.
Yeah.
Two fighter squadrons and a couple of attack squadrons. A4s were in those. Then some medium attack, which are A6s. We don't have A6s anymore.
Right.
They're a fantastic bomber.
Yeah.
It's a shame they got rid of it. But anyway, all that led up to our first deployment to Westpac. We had some training down in the Mediterranean, or not the Mediterranean, but Caribbean, where we did a lot of our overwater training, and then we had the night quals for the pilots in VF-11. You had to go down to Fentressville.
Oh, yeah.
Do night
Right over here in
landings.
Chesapeake, Virginia.
Yeah, 10 miles.
And that's where you'll do nighttime touch and goes to simulate
Simulate
touch
landing
and
on
go
the
on a
carrier.
night landing on a carrier.
Had to do normally is at least about 8 periods of 6 to 8, whatever you can get landings on a tank of gas. And the LSOs, landing signal officer, he was the guy that made the decision after you did your passes or that everything looks good and you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Pick out any problems that you're showing up. You'd normally see those early and then correct them.
So you were telling me off camera that you got to this point or the Navy got to this point where they were short on pilots. And so you were a Rio, but then you got an opportunity to fly because they needed pilots. And so that vision that you had for being a pilot came to fruition.
Right.
What did that feel like when you
It
finally
was
got-
fantastic. I had talked to the CO of 11 about it, and he says, Bob, they're giving waivers for experienced officers, flight experience, that maybe a slight waiver depends on how bad your eyes are. But they're given waivers to go into pilot training. And I says, I'd like to apply. And he says, I'll write you an endorsement. And so I applied, and the word came back before the fire that I'd been accepted.
Wow.
And so, which meant that once we finished our cruise and went back to the States, then I would leave the F-11 and go back through flight training for pilot program.
So let's, if we can, let's move to a part that I know may be a little painful and uncomfortable. And if you tell me, hey, Kenny, don't want to talk about that, you got the right to shut it down and tell me don't want to chat. But I'd love to get to a point in our podcast now where I'm talking to this young naval officer, young mom, home, newlywed.
I wasn't a mom yet.
Wasn't a mom yet, sorry. Sorry, I was progressing things too.
He left
got married.
6 days before our anniversary.
Yeah, we got married in June of '66.
Wow.
And of course, we left June of '67.
So June of '67, you leave. A year later, July 29th, 1967, I think is the right date.
Yep.
Tragedy strikes on board the USS Forrestal. And for those of you who don't know a lot of history about Vietnam, what Bob's going to share with us today is what happened on this aircraft carrier that really changed the trajectory of how the Navy fires today on board naval vessels. But Bob, you volunteered on the Navy. You volunteered to be a Rio with this vision in your mind to be a pilot. And that vision set in course came to reality because of your stick-to-itiveness and your desire to, and God giving you the desires of your heart. When July 29th, 1967 happened, did you have any regret about, holy cow, I'm out here out at sea? What went through your mind when you first saw the first explosion? And Bob and Joy were kind enough to bring, can you get this on the camera there, good? You brought this Life magazine, and this is August 11th, 1967. And thank you for bringing it today. It's a piece of history. But you lost over, was it 150?
134.
134 men that day, 134 sailors, and some friends.
A lot of those guys were what they call night check workers, which meant they worked at night and slept in the daytime. And their spaces were back aft under the fantail. And so when those bombs started going off, they started blowing big holes into those berthing spaces for those night check guys.
So when I open up this page for you,
you could drop a Beetle Volkswagen down in that hole.
holy cow.
But there was not only the blast, the smoke, the heat, all of that, and those guys were asleep. Some of them never woke up.
I was going to put a video up on the TV today, and I just decided not to while we're sitting here chatting, just so, not so much for you, but for me, because we got the tissues out here, and I'm like, man, if I start watching this stuff, it's tough. Where were you?
It's ironic. I had duty in the ready room. I was the duty officer for that specific day. We rotated every day. Different officer would stand the duty, the juniors officers. And I just happened to have the duty on that day. And our ready room was back under the number 3 deck pennant, where you got 4 cables across that deck. And we were about, I think it was about number 3, 2 or 3, right in there. So we were right below on the section right below the flight deck. So it was as soon as it started, you have the TV monitors that actually showed what the camera was looking at up on the island. The camera, big camera, would rotate between the front, looking at the front of the fantail and the back,
And post-production, by the way, Jordan, I'd like to have, as Bob's describing this, if we can put some of those pieces from YouTube. And great, they're giving me the thumbs up. Sorry to cut your thought off there.
That's right. But it was, and of course, obviously we could feel the explosions. But they, fortunately for us, they weren't in the center of that landing area. They were around the area because that's where all the airplanes were parked, around the edge of the fantail, getting ready to go fly, because they're getting ready to launch what they call a mini alpha, which is about 16 planes, I think.
Yeah.
And so they were all started or in the process of starting. And so I was able to see what was going on. At that point, when the first bomb went off, the camera was actually watching an A-3 tanker launch.
Tanker meaning a fuel tank?
Yeah, that's what your airborne refueling comes from.
Okay.
And so one had launched, and they were getting ready to launch the second one. The good thing about that is those jets were loaded with fuel, because that's where you did your in-flight refueling.
Okay.
Where you'd get airborne and find the tanker. He'd be at 5,000, 7,000, wherever. We would know where we were going to rendezvous with him and pick up 2,000 or 3,000 pounds of gas. Depends on what your mission was.
Sure.
But so as soon as the bomb went off, the airplane was an A4, and it was parked back about where the Fresnel lens was, and what basically happened. One of the things that really hurt for a long time was I had a young man that was he was a phone talker, and they had phone talkers in every ready room, and they would keep track of information, what was going on, who was launching, who was recovering, so forth. And about 9 o'clock, he said, Mr. Sandlin says, do you mind if I go get a couple hours of sleep? Never saw him again. Young guy. But that hurt, because afterwards they had to see crews back into those spaces to bring the bodies out. And
so you said that was around 09?
that was
I
about
think go ahead.
10:59 is when the bomb exploded.
Yeah.
So they were, all those guys that worked nights were in the spaces, and most of them were asleep. Some of them never woke up. Some of them got up and got as far as the door. But the explosions were pretty impactful.
Wow. Was there ever that point where Joy saying, Bob, I don't want you to fly? And in that moment where you're thinking, what the heck am I doing on this carrier?
It never crossed my mind.
Yeah.
It just, you focused on what's going on right then. And basically what we had to focus on is we had to follow the rules, which is you go forward on the starboard side, you go aft on the port side. And that was the rule for how you moved around on that level that we were. And we were right below the flight deck. So that's what we ultimately did, is as we began to watch what was going on, and then we realized in the radio room what we needed to do to start moving out of that space back there.
From your recollection, how long, so there was multiple explosions, I think 3 big ones,
There were more than that.
Yeah.
The first one I watched, and that was the one where it was the Zuni rocket that was accidentally triggered.
Right.
And there were several discussions about what may have caused that rocket to go off.
Pretty famous guy, took some heat for a little while, right?
Yes, he did. It was his A4.
Yeah, Senator John McCain we're talking about.
Yep.
God rest his soul.
Yep, and that a Zuni rocket came off of the wing of an F-4 because one of the comments was it looks like the starter was parked in its position so that the exhaust out of its turbine was hot enough that it cooked off one of the rockets. Just the heat creates a mixture of metals and so forth, and so that Zuni rocket happened to be pointed directly at the centerline tank across the fantail there to John McCain's A4, and when it penetrated that tank, that of course it exploded the tank, and then as an aside, all the weapons, most of the weapons that were loaded, came from a UNREP the night before. UNREP is underway replenishment, where we have supply ships that come alongside the carrier, and we're moving at a certain whatever speed they select, and throw lanyards to big, huge ropes across, or whatever they use. I don't know, but to get the weapons that were being
Those munitions you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, bombs.
Yeah.
Those were loaded that morning for that mini Alpha, and those bombs were the bombs that went off. They were actually supposed to have gone to the desert for destruction because they were unstable.
Those were the old World War II bombs you were telling me about, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're one deck below the flight deck. What did that feel like when that first
Well, it
bomb?
shook us.
Okay.
It shook us, but because the bomb it was around the periphery of the fantail where the airplanes were parked. All the airplanes parked nose in at an angle so that you can taxi out and go forward to the catapults.
Okay.
And so we knew where it was because we felt it, and then we saw it. And then when the first bomb went off, there was a chief that ran up with his extinguisher and tried to cool that bomb, keep it from going off, but he wasn't successful, and the bomb went off, and that was the first bomb that actually exploded. The chief was gone, the bottle was gone, and of course the wing was gone.
There's video of that today, and
Yep.
I looked at that. It was pretty sobering to see that young chief do his job.
Yeah.
You know, he went in to try to save those pilots, and there were 2 pilots in the cockpits of some planes.
Yeah, this one, the A4s, normally most of those were one cockpit.
Okay.
So McCain actually, his seat was what they call a zero seat.
Okay.
He could have ejected right there, but he was able to crawl out onto his fuel probe, which stuck out the front,
Right.
and then drop down to the deck and get away. I think he sprained his ankle. But at
And
least
so
he-
a zero seat, you can be at 0 altitude,
Yeah.
and it'll send you high enough for the chute to
Right.
deploy.
Right.
Okay.
most of the seats now are zero seats.
Are they?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I was reading in the old Life magazine article here that there was actually I guess another pilot who had jumped out, and it's a pretty decent fall. He broke his hip. Was one person. It may have been a crew chief that had jumped and couldn't move, and a sailor came and pulled him out, saved his life, pulled him out from the intense heat, not just the fire, but the intense heat that was on that deck. And that's I'm going to show another picture here, and we'll have some video as well. But this
that
is
looks like an A5, the Vigilante,
okay.
which is a photo bird, super fast.
Yeah.
There was supposed to have been a bomber, but it didn't work out as a bomber, so they used it as a recon aircraft.
Bob, there's a sobering quote in here. In 5 minutes, everyone on this ship became a man.
There were some little guys that picked up big missiles and threw them over the side.
134-pound man, it was quoted in Life magazine, picked up a 240-pound bomb
Wow.
and carried it to the side and drops it in the ocean.
Wow.
Pretty crazy.
Yeah. And there was, and of course, the big thing too was the people that were below decks. You had to follow the protocol, or else you'd have a big mass of people and people trying to go different directions, and it just didn't work. I was, as we went aft on our side, starboard side, I stepped out into the opening area before going up the ladder to the flight deck, and there was one trooper that had already been brought down, and his abdomen had been ripped open. His intestines were laying on his abdomen, and it was tough to see.
I don't guess you expected as a pilot that you would ever feel like you would come up close and personal with tragedy like that. I mean, I think sometimes pilots, you're making raids, and obviously there's some raids where you come in pretty low altitude and you know the damage you're doing to the person on the ground. But how did that affect the rest of your military career? How does it? I mean, I can see your face today, and me thinking about it.
Yeah.
Pretty heart-wrenching, but
well, when we came back, we actually, when we got the fires under control, and that was the big concern. We didn't know how much of a concern because we didn't know what was happening overall, but the XO did. And the XO of the ship told us not to, or the troops that had the fire hoses, not to flood the aft magazine. And we're thinking, why wouldn't you flood the magazine? Because of the fire. If a fire gets in the magazine, that magazine goes up.
Yeah,
and it was because of the buoyancy. They'd pumped so much water. Their little destroyer that was alongside, I believe it was a destroyer. It was amazing the coxswain was able to keep that right tucked right in the port side aft, pumping water into the back of the ship. Yeah. And so they didn't flood the aft magazine, and they got the fire under control without that happening.
You're pretty exposed at sea. I think what I read, you were 150 miles off the coast of Vietnam. Mm-hmm. That's a long swim. So your potential for survival is everybody working together, and that's land. I mean, you got this big chunk of metal in the middle of this pretty violent ocean. Was there ever a point where you thought, we may lose this ship?
Actually, no, not for me. I never really thought about the possibility of losing the ship. I thought they would ultimately get that under control. A lot of bombs went off. I don't know how many, but it never crossed my mind that the ship would sink. For a big carrier with a huge displacement of water, you just don't throw that into the picture. Yeah. We just didn't know how serious it was for that aft magazine. There was a lot of course, and that's back there is where the bombs are blowing holes, as you saw, down in through the deck.
How thick is the metal on the flight deck?
That's a great question.
It looks from that hole, it looks to be, and again, you can't. Well, at least maybe an engineer could who would look at this picture, but this hole in the ship looks like it was peeled back like a banana peel, but it appears. Let me get to that page. It appears like this hole is, or that this metal, like I'm looking at this section right along here.
You can sort of get an idea.
Inches thick.
Yeah.
Multiple inches thick.
Yeah. When you got airplanes 40, 50,000 pounds. Yes, we had to be, I can't remember the exact numbers, but you always have a specific limit of fuel because of the weight. And so when you come aboard, especially at night, it's important that you land on the ball with your maximum amount of gas. And so you have to plan that while you're in holding and with your mission. So you come back and come down, and when you call the ball, you call what you got,
Right.
and you want to be sure that you may be bingo +1 or bingo +2, which means you got 2 shots at the deck. If you don't trap, if you hook skip once and a high, bolter, bingo. And then you immediately turn toward your bingo field. And then the tanker is up there and he's around and he catches you. And if you can fuel, then they can tell you to come back, or the LSO may say, no, go and come back tomorrow or something like that.
Wow.
So it's, but most of the time the tanker is very critical because he has gas to give and he hawks that deck, especially if they see there's a pilot that's boltering and you only have a couple of passes.
Yeah.
A couple of 3 passes max probably to get that airplane trapped.
So on this morning of July 29th, how many hours would you recollect it took to get it under control where you felt like, or that the captain felt like the ship was safe from more bombs and munitions going off, and how much time had to pass by? How long did it take you guys?
I couldn't give you a guess. It's probably the middle of the afternoon. Because first of all, you got the airplanes that are still exposed to the fire, and if they've got bombs on them, which means there's potentiality for those bombs to go as well. And so there were several all the way around, and plus afterwards you can go back and look. We would go up to the flight deck on the way back to Subic Bay in the Philippines. We would look around and see nothing but the framework of a couple of motors that maybe were in the F4, just laying there side by side on the flight deck.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of pictures in here of that. Yeah, this one is pretty sobering.
Yes. It got pretty hot. And, so the most, I don't think we lost any officers.
Oof. Joy, this is going on the ship, middle of the day, you're back. What's the time difference between Vietnam and?
I have no idea.
So when did you find out that there was a problem?
Well, back up a little bit. Him leaving was really traumatic for me because he left 6 days before our first anniversary. And so my parents flew to Virginia Beach, and we packed our stuff in our apartment and took it back. Because at that time, none of us knew if anybody would come back from Vietnam or how long it would be. And so
it was open-ended orders. You got orders, but it wasn't like you might do 6 months, you might do a year, you might have to do 2 years.
Well, most of the carriers that were going to Vietnam were going from the West Coast. And so sending the East Coast carriers was added on to the program.
Okay.
And that's the reason we were going. So you figure you may be over there 6 months or 8 months, something like that.
How long did you end up staying?
But because of the problem, the fire and all that stuff, we headed back after we made emergency repairs. We went into Subic Bay and they did emergency repairs, what they needed to do. The irony is that in the worst case, if we had needed to, we could have launched and then it would have been dicey, but we actually could have recovered an airplane.
Wow.
Probably the number 3 or number 4. But that would have been really, really dicey. They really didn't want to have to go there.
Yeah.
Fortunately, we weren't. We were able to take the carrier to the Philippines, get the repairs, and then at a very slow pace, 16, 17 knots, which is slow, because there was no planning en route to go across the pond, because for the refueling that would be necessary for the carrier and the small boy that was following with us. They, more than us, drove our speed down,
Gotcha.
kept us slower so we could stay together.
Yeah.
But I think we got back, I believe it was the 1st of October.
Wow.
It took a while.
So Joy, let's bring this home now.
Okay, so I went back to Kentucky, and I was teaching school, and it was a weekend. At least it was for me. I guess it was for him, our way over there. But anyway, my sister and I were in the kitchen, and the radio was on, and my sister said, Joy, they just said on the radio that the Forrestal caught on fire, and pilots and their crew were trapped in their planes.
Mm.
And I said, what? And so I didn't pay attention to the radio. So I called the radio station and asked them to repeat it, and they repeated it. And I was just beside myself.
Oh, yeah.
But because I hadn't heard from him. So it was 4 days before they limped into the Philippines, and he was able to call me and tell me. In the meantime, I was calling his pilot's wife and asking, who's back here in Virginia Beach, and saying, have you heard anything? Have you heard anything? And she said, no. She and the CO's wife had been going around and talking to the widows of those who had lost husbands and telling them. They were the ones to tell them. And she said, just remember that no news is good news.
Yeah.
And she said, we haven't heard anything about them. If something had happened to them, I think we would have heard it by now. Mm-hmm. She said, so just be patient. And after 4 days, he called me.
What did that feel like?
That was wonderful. It was wonderful.
They told us that they were sending out telegrams.
And I never got a
To
telegram.
all of the people that survived. But that didn't, somehow, that got lost in the works. And it wasn't until we got into the Philippines that we were able to get to a phone.
How many sailors were on the Forrestal? Just estimate.
Oh, I don't know, somewhere around 5,000.
Plus, you had some jarheads on there, too. Did you have any Marines on?
I think we may have had some Marines on there.
Yeah, you know the Marine qualification. You're talking about 16 weeks to qualify and become a. So a Marine's qualification is in 2 minutes how many crayons can you eat? You pass that exam. So
the color, I probably shouldn't even go here with it.
Yeah, let's do it.
The
Let's go there.
The Marines would fly F-4s as well, and there would be occasions where they would have to come out and day qual. And that was always very colorful. And so everybody would be notified. We would know when the Marines were coming. Trip Tray was their squadron. And they would come out and do their day quals. And so it would be colorful.
I can imagine.
We would have fun with the guys.
Yeah.
Because they were safe.
Yeah.
They were just colorful.
Yeah. Inter-service rivalry is nothing like it. It's a lot of fun. So you get this phone call from Bob in the Philippines, and can you remember what that conversation was like?
I honestly don't remember, other than the fact that I was so thrilled that
To
he
hear
was
his
alive,
voice.
that he was okay, that he was coming home.
Yeah.
They weren't going to, I could think some of the people like John McCain actually volunteered to go right back, which was honorable for him that he went right back. And ultimately, of course, he got captured. But I was just happy that Bob was coming home.
Yeah. So, Bob, you retired from the Navy, fighter pilot. What, after this incident with the Forrestal, where'd you head? What did you do?
Well, when we got back, then I went right back into the flight training program. So I went down to Pensacola, and because I was already commissioned, I didn't have to go through the boot training and all that stuff. I just went, and that's where the basics for training for pilots were. It's in Pensacola. And we flew T-34, I think Bravos, Alphas or Bravos, which is a recip engine.
Okay.
Fun airplane to fly. And then you went through the syllabus, and after you finished in Pensacola, then there was determination of which route that you went, whether you went jets, props, or helos. Depends on how well you did in that first training. And I ended up going to Meridian to fly the T2 Charlie, not the Charlie, T2 Bravo or the Alpha one, I believe, jet. And it was fun to fly. And then after you finished there, you came back to Pensacola and went through, we had, I think it was 4 day traps. That's all you get, but that was your beginning.
So explain a day trap to us. What does that mean?
That's just a day landing
Okay.
on a carrier.
Got it.
And
What was the first landing on a carrier for you like? What?
It was exuberance. I mean, you're glad that you got aboard, you know, and you did 4 of them. And so this is strictly day quals. And when I qual, it was on the Lexington, which had a wooden deck.
Really?
How old the Lexington was.
Wow.
It's since been, I don't know what they did with it.
Decommissioned.
Graveyard.
Yeah, as a minimum, it was decommissioned.
A museum somewhere, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
What was your first night landing on a carrier like? I hear that has that's as close to your blood pressure and the excitement that a person feels or the stress that a pilot feels. It's one of the highest, most stressful things I've heard.
They did a stress test between being shot at with a missile and landing at night on the carrier. And the word that I had heard, I didn't see the test material to confirm that, but it was more stressful for a pilot landing at night on the carrier than it was to be shot at. I mean, you have to, your total dedication and total focus is on landing and getting everything right. Your airspeed, your altitude, your descent rate. You had to be on and on and on.
A little white dot in the middle of the ocean that's moving, right?
If you're when you're in, that's good. You'd be about 20 miles out if you were at 5,000 feet, or it's up above. Depends on what your altitude and your range from the carrier was a stair step, and then you would push over, and you'd normally push over every minute. From your holding, you were in circles, and then you would be 1,000 feet apart from the other guys. They would be 1,000 feet. That's the way you were separated up, and they'd set those parameters up with you checked in with the control.
So, take me back to the day of the Forrestal and that tragedy. Now, not to minimize the tragedy of what happened, but just so I can have a comparison for the feeling that you went through. I don't even know if I want to call it fear, but if you compared that moment when you holy cow, this is not good, and what type of feeling that emitted, and then landing on a carrier at night. Any comparisons, any similar feelings, or like, uh-oh?
I think it's a different psyche. It's landing at night. It's just, there is no comparison with that. Going through that process, you just have to be totally focused. In the fire situation, there's a concern, but I don't remember it being the same type of concern. I remember my last night trap as a pilot, and holding, and I'm thinking to myself, Lord, it's just you and me. Of course, there's a guy in the back seat because I was flying Phantoms.
But he has no stick.
And he has no stick. And he got vertigo, and then I got vertigo, and we didn't tell each other. When you get vertigo, the pilot, you always have to force yourself to focus on your instruments and believe the instruments, because you feel like it. I did a bolter one night and came off the angle, and I immediately felt like I was in a 30-degree right-hand turn. And I wasn't. I was level with a slight nose up. And I had to believe, and
Focus
the
on
bad part of that was the primary gyro froze.
Oh, no.
And then I had a little bitty gyro down off to the right, and I quickly told the guy in the back, I says, my primary's frozen, I'm looking at the little gyro, back me up. And so, because when you come off the carrier, of course, as soon as you touch down, you always go to full power. It doesn't affect the fact that your hook is holding a wire. you always go to full power as soon
Just
as you
in case?
touch down, and just in case you miss the wire.
Yeah.
And you are right at flying speed anyway. So you go to full, you don't go to burner, but you go to full 100%, and then rotate, gentle rotation back up to 500 feet or whatever you're flying. And then you'll turn downwind and enter, and they always make I remember now what the sequence was is maybe 3 in a row and then 1 open spot, and then 3 more in a row and 1 open spot. So those are bolter holes. And so if somebody bolters, they come around and go back down. It's a racetrack pattern until they get to that point where the first hole is. It's the separation between the two airplanes. And there's enough separation that you can get in there, and the timing will still work for landing.
So some of your night flights and night landings, was there ever a time where you missed the catapult or you missed the wire? Can you
Would you like to ask me another question?
Is that going too deep? I'm asking.
I have boltered at night. I did.
Okay.
I boltered in the daytime.
But if you're doing it at night, you're like, crap, I just missed this thing. Now I got to come back around and do it again.
That's right.
The nerves have to be a little
That's right.
higher at that point because
Sure.
you're like, I just missed this.
And you have to look at your gas. That may be a bolter at bingo +1, and so means you got one more shot at the deck.
Yeah.
And as soon as if you don't trap that time, you immediately know that you start climbing out and heading toward your bolter field, wherever that is. It could be, if it's off the coast here, you head to Oceana, or we had different fields in the Med. When I was in the Med, that we would know were our divert fields.
If Joy and Bob, if one of your grandchildren came to you today and said, Grandpa, Grandma, I want to do what do they call you guys, Grandma and Grandpa?
Grandma and Granddad.
And Granddad. I want to go be a naval aviator. What would you say?
Yes.
That didn't take long.
No.
Why?
Because it's some of the best training you can get as a pilot.
Joy, I'm going to let him finish that, but what would you say to him?
I would say, if that's what you want to do and you feel like God's leading you to do that, I had to reach that point myself with Bob because it was very frightening. We lost a lot of friends in the military.
And you had a couple of sons who flew.
Yes.
Both of them friends of mine.
Yes.
Shout out to Chris and Kevin. Kevin actually trained me. I've got 43 hours now. Wow. And that was one of my lifelong dreams.
Wow.
Was to fly. And Kevin and I met in a Bible study, and we were talking one day. He wanted to learn about finance. I wanted to learn how to fly, and he was like, how's next Thursday? And I went, what do you mean? Yeah. He's like, well, I'll take you up, and we'll see if you really want to do this. Now I got kind of lazy. I haven't finished my ground school yet, but we did a cross country to your house, and we got caught in a little ice storm. Do you remember that? Do you remember? I've got pictures of Kevin on top of the Cessna raking ice off the wings.
I don't remember that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I remember that well.
Yeah, we were on the way to your house, and Kevin says, uh-oh. And that's not something you want to hear in the cockpit of a little airplane.
Right.
143, I think we were in Cessna.
Hmm.
And I said, what's uh-oh mean? He goes, well, pull up. We need to get some altitude. I'm like, why? He's like, see that piston right there? It's running a little hot. That means there's probably some ice over the manifold. And I'm like, okay. Now, there goes experience and training. I would have wanted to take the plane down, but he was like, we need more altitude because if we have to land this plane, we need a greater glide slope.
Yep.
We need more altitude to find a perfect place to fly the plane to the scene of the crime, right?
Yep. He loves teaching, he's very good at it.
He is excellent, And now he's flying for UPS.
Yes.
Yeah, and
he didn't
777.
fly as a pilot when he was in the Navy. He was in the back seat,
was a
like
Rio
Bob
guy.
started out. Yes.
Yeah, isn't
and
that interesting?
I've heard him say that most of the guys, when he was in the back seat, most of the guys who were qualling on the carrier, having to do their first catch, would invariably ask him to be their instructor, fly with him,
In the
because
backseat.
Isn't
he
that
would
something?
calm. He would keep them calm.
Yeah.
He would never, get flustered or anything, and no matter what they were doing, and that they all liked him for that.
And then Chris, who's a friend of mine and client of our firm, he went to fly
Yeah, he majored
and
in
actually
aviation.
and now, crossed over and became a endodontist. So shout out to Chris this morning. So
That's in the playbook.
yeah, it's in the playbook. Out in Nashville, great city. So, the grandsons come along, or granddaughter even, and so I knew you would probably answer that question pretty fast. That yes, definitely go do it. And aviation,
It's some of the best training that you'll get as a pilot
Yeah.
in the Navy.
Yeah.
By design, you got to know how to do it right, because when you get out there at night, it's you got to be able to make it work.
So I always tell folks, because I'm in the financial business and I do podcasts because I just love interviewing and, talking to people about their story. If you take this naval career and your training as an aviator and as a mom, but you studied to be a teacher?
I taught school for a year
Taught
before I
school,
got
yeah.
married, and then
So raising a family, if you think about your finances and your financial decisions and what the Navy and all of this training did for you and your mindset, you've retired with some success, and congratulations on that too. You made it through the tough part. So what kind of impact do you think that all of that training had on your mindset and your discipline in other parts of your life?
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed flying. I had a problem later on because my eyes. I had to start wearing glasses at night initially to fly, because I guess is probably a little bit of the stigmatism. We could see it on the ball when I'd be night landing, and my corrections would be late, which meant I wasn't getting good focus at distance. And as I got in closer, I would get a clearer view, and then I'd have to make corrections. And so I'd start wearing glasses at night, and then as they progressed, I had to start wearing glasses all the time whenever I flew. And it's bothered me, especially when I would be flying we would be deployed. And it really bothered me to be able to, a concern about being able to focus clear at night. It's just something that I let concern me.
Yeah.
I worried about it.
Yeah.
Because you want to be able to see everything precisely and clearly. And if you start noticing that from time to time, my vision wasn't as clear as I thought it should be. So anyway,
that was before they let you wear contacts. Now they let you wear contacts.
Oh, wow.
Nope, I didn't get to wear contacts.
A little more strict back then, right? I think than
I don't know.
some of the rules today.
Yeah, used to at one time. Yeah, you couldn't wear glasses.
Yeah.
Anything. You had to be straight, 20/20, uncorrected, no astigmatism.
Wow. So when you retired and you saw this kind of happening with your vision, and you retired from the Navy, you guys just to have extra income and to do some time freedom, money freedom, you chose to go to do some things in direct sales.
Oh.
Which you've been doing very successfully for years.
Yeah, since
And,
1977.
So we give a
79.
since
sorry.
1970, and you've
79.
been with
79.
one company
Yes.
since 70, and that's Shackley.
Shackley Corporation.
Yeah. So that you don't hear much about anymore. People hop ship and jump to the next thing a lot. Where do you think that stick-to-itiveness you learn from the Navy and just the discipline to stay with one company? What?
Well, it was a great company. So why would we want to leave the
Yeah.
best company there is?
That's awesome.
Yeah, we started 79, and today, the only thing we've done regarding the food supplements, what we call food supplements, is we take more than
Yeah.
we took when we first
Yeah.
started out. And,
Well, keep doing it. It's working.
yeah. that I've had several people. One guy came out to look at our roof on our garage because we had some wind blowing some of them, and we were talking, and I don't remember now how it got close to that. And then I says, we take food supplements. I says, and you didn't know I was 135 years old, did you? The guy looks at me really funny. What? But and I'd do that with folks. But we always had good, it felt good and everything.
Yeah.
But I'm the primary one that does the business. He actually worked for 18 years after retired as a flight instructor.
A simulator instructor.
Simulator, right.
For the F-14.
At NAS Norfolk? Is that
Oceana.
what you did? At Oceana. At Oceana. Okay. And did that on the civil service side while you had the entrepreneurial spirit of running a direct sales
He's
business?
always supportive of me and everything, but, he had another job.
Well, I hear him share the Shackley story more with people than you do, Joy.
Oh, really?
He's always promoting well. So.
I know.
And then he sends them, over to you to get their order done, right? So
We're not afraid to talk about Shackley.
you shouldn't be. That's great. I mean, I think you're a testament of how well those supplements have been in your life and what they've done for you. I always like to ask, and this is a question for both of you, and as we start to close out the podcast today, there are things that influence us all in life. Some of the greatest influences in your life, a book, a faith. Where would you say most of your influence has come from that has led you to live the life that you've led, or that you're living?
Well, I was pretty much of a rounder when I was in high school and early years of college. And then when Joy and I started going together, and I realized that I need to refocus where my priorities were. And I began to realize that my first priority should be to God. And so that's basically what I started to do. Is I started to try to focus on what the Lord would lead me, how he would lead me on a daily basis. And I wanted to try to do the same thing in terms of our family life as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was interesting. Decisions, sometimes we disagree on things. And
Yeah.
we had to work through it.
How many years of marriage now?
Be 55 in June.
55 years. What would you tell young people today is one of the keys to a long relationship?
To put God in your life first.
Okay.
First and foremost, before anything else. It's not
great.
just husband and wife. God is always there.
Yeah.
And he has seen us through so many things. And we just trust him. I mean, there's no other way. So he has been the strength for our marriage.
Yeah. That's beautiful. 55 years. Congratulations
Thank you.
on that.
Thank you.
What an awesome testament of stick-to-itiveness. Right? Because you had to put up with this guy for 55 years, Joy. I mean,
Well, he was gone a
You
lot.
were doing all right till you started.
He was gone a lot.
so books you read. You guys like to read, right? If you were going to tell folks some great books to pick up and read,
I don't
anything that sticks out to you that you would say, hey, other than Scripture itself,
That's the most important one.
right?
Well, I'm the same boat. There are several books that I wanted to get to, never got to, but they're still there. So I may go by sometime and pick one out. But we tend to focus. There are several things that we do when we have our devotion, and we try to do that early in the morning if we can. And we have a book called Inspired Evidence, and it's a 365-day. So every page, every date has something to talk about God's creation.
Inspired Evidence.
It's called Inspired
Who's
Evidence.
the publisher? Who writes it? Do you know?
There's a couple, and I can't remember their names right off. But
But we'll give you a copy. We have some copies.
Yeah, we'll actually put it up on the website. We'll find it, and can you pick it up like on Amazon or? website, or where would
I
you
don't
order
know.
them
We order it in bulk so we can give them away.
from? Oh, great.
And we might be you might be able to talk us into getting one for you.
For free.
But
All
it's
right.
it
I'll take
covers God's creation in a way that people don't have a clue.
Mm.
You know, it's just amazing that different things, different parts of our bodies, how our
Yeah.
eye was formed, how can a deer see at night, just different things that,
Sounds very
and
interesting.
we don't have a clue. You know, what is the appendix? Appendix, people used to say appendix is just a wasteful thing. It turns out it's not wasteful at all. It has a very distinct purpose.
It's another filtration system in our body. Right?
And it's
Yeah.
a storage of good bacteria for your intestinal tract. And when the body needs it, it goes there and gets it. They never knew
Yeah.
that.
Years ago, they would just rip it out. Oh, you don't need your appendix. Let's just
Tonsils is
And
another
tonsils.
thing.
Yeah,
Take
we
'em
both
out.
had our
Yeah.
tonsils out. No, you didn't have yours out, did you?
Did not.
I had
Yeah.
mine out. It was just routine. Every child had their
Yeah.
tonsils removed.
What's your daily routine? So, Bob, you're young man now at
I'll give you about 30 minutes to quit talking.
77.
Okay.
77.
All right, you got me. I know when to stop. What do you do to stay fit
Well,
besides beating up young men?
yeah. We try to walk a little bit. There's a segment out in our area where we are. It's a great community, and it's about 1.25 miles down and around, and then coming back, it's another 1.25. And so we just try to do that.
Every day if it's
Joy's
good weather.
good. She'll go every day if she can, and I try to do that too. We try to do that. We try to,
You try to eat healthy.
and
Oh, we don't-
we have a regimen of food supplements that we don't let people see, because we use the comparison with M&M bag. Do you eat M&Ms? Well, yes. How
Whole
many
bag.
are in that bag?
That's right.
Oh gosh, I don't have any idea. Well, I can't tell you what we have
But
in our food supplements.
They gasp if they see the number of supplements that we take, but it's no more than somebody sitting down and eating a bag of M&Ms, which is anti-health.
What folks want to know about Shackley, we'll put a link
Okay.
on the site for them if they want to talk to you.
Okay.
They can get hold of you. We'll do that with post production and let them chat to you. You've always told me that that's a big part of it, and walking and the old, I think Bob told me once, happy wife, happy life. And,
I agree with that.
I don't know if I said that. But
yeah, I'm just
I'll
messing
take
with
credit for
you.
it.
Yeah, I'm just messing with you. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on our show today and sharing your life story with us. And there's a lot more we could talk about, but I want to.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was just going to add one thing to go back to the fire. That it's one thing to lose 134 troops, but the thing that came out of that is the things that we learned about fighting fires on a carrier. They were significant. We had one of the problems we had was we had one hose had water in it and one hose had foam in it, and they were fighting each other, and so neither one of them were effective, and that happened. We didn't realize that they didn't know that was happening.
So you're washing away the foam.
So
with
you're
the water.
washing the foam with the water, and then neither one of them is effective. It's in later fires with other carriers, those applications made the difference.
Wow.
And it was really, we can take out something good. It wasn't good to lose 134 troops, but we can take out what we learned by that in future fire protection.
And isn't that one of those lessons in life that when bad things happen to you, find the good in the bad and go, what can I take as a lesson in this to improve forward? And I think the Navy did a great job of that.
Right.
That they took a really bad situation and learned from it. And so shout out to the Navy for, fixing things that they saw were a problem.
Right.
And I think if we can just learn that lesson in everything else that we do in life, we'll all be better for it. And
Oh, amen.
like when you tell me to shut up and stop asking you how old you are, okay, roger that.
We don't really mind people knowing how old we are.
Oh,
I just want to say I'm grateful to God that He spared both of our lives. We both could have
Yeah.
been killed and weren't. So God had a purpose for us, and I think that purpose was because we have 23 grandchildren.
23 grandkids today.
We have 11 biological grandsons, 11 biological granddaughters, and one a stepdaughter.
Beautiful.
And God, they wouldn't be here if either one of us had died.
Yeah.
So
So that is a great point, and I think God has still an amazing purpose in your life, and one of them today that we got this opportunity to share your story.
thank you for having us.
Not only with your grandchildren, which was a big thing for me. I was like, Bob, you got to get this story out, and I'm sure they've heard it a little bits and pieces, but in my mind's eye, you're two American heroes, and we need more folks like you in,
Well, I'm
in our
not a
country.
hero,
so.
but I definitely
Yeah,
feel like Bob is.
well, to put up with this guy, and I'm going to get my butt kicked, I'm sure, after I take this mic. But, yeah, I mean, for when you serve, these guys always get the glamour.
Well, I do think it has an impact on them because a lot of military families get divorced. A lot of our military friends divorced or were killed.
Yeah.
But I think having Christ as our ground saved us. But I do feel like a man who doesn't have a wife that's waiting for him or,
It's tough.
yeah, I think it's hard for him.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your commitment. I think it's a great testament, whether you believe in God or not. You've certainly expressed through how you've lived your life what dedication and commitment and discipline looks like from a good side. So thank you for coming and sharing with us today. We're going to go to dinner tonight and have a little celebration and enjoy Virginia Beach today while I go to work for a little while.
Sounds like a
you.
plan.
So, hey, thanks so much for joining me, and God bless you, and many more years of success and
Thank
opportunity, you guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's a wrap.